Aber das Problem ist, mein Deutsch ist nicht sehr gut. The problem is my German is not very good. And since it is a book, I would be afraid of pronouncing words quite wrong. But if that is possible, I can think about it in the future if wanted. And mais on pourrait, on fait en français. We could do one also in French. We could do one in Arabic. There's a lot of options, but for right now we can stick to Kurdish. We can stick to English literature. Welcome back, everyone. I feel horrible, and I am deeply sorry, as the plan was that I would upload another video quite soon after the previous one, but things didn't go to plan, and I've had barely any time to record another one. So, with that out of the way, I do sincerely apologize. And I hope that today's video can give you guys some good sleeping time. Today I would like to read a new book. And I actually got gifted this book by a friend, so I thought that it would be a good time to read it here, because I'm interested to see what are the contents. The book today that we are going to read is If We Were Villains by 𝓦𝓮𝓻𝓮. I actually do not know anything about this book, so it would be quite new to me too. It says, when friends become enemies, if we were villains, there's no limit to the damage they can do. Like Donna Tartt's The Secret History, 𝓦𝓮𝓻𝓮 sparkling debut is a richly layered story of love, friendship, and obsession. Cynthia Diapri-Sweeney. And here is the side. A rare and extraordinary novel and a genuinely breathtaking literary thriller. Emily St. John Mandel, New York Times best-selling author of Station 11. Okay, let us read the contents of the book. Oliver Marks has just served 10 years for a murder he may or may not have committed. On the day of his release, he is greeted by the detective who put him in prison. Detective Colborne is retiring, and he wants to know what really happened a decade before. As a young actor and an elite conservatory, Oliver noticed that his talented classmates seem to play the same characters on stage and off. Villain, hero, temptress, though he was always a supporting role. But when the teachers changed the casting, a good-natured rivalry turns ugly, and the plays spill dangerously over into real life. When tragedy strikes, one of the 7 friends is found dead. arrest face their greatest acting challenge yet, convincing the police and themselves that they are blameless. Expertly plotted, beautifully written, it will keep you riveted to its final electrifying moments. By Cynthia D'Aprix Sweeney. A whip-smart, chilling tale, a page-turning literary thriller whose final shocking twist you won't forget. Miranda Beverly Whitmore. I don't actually read these types of books. I typically, by my own time, read self-improvement books. I tend to enjoy them quite a lot as they have lessons that I can use into my own life. But reading fiction is also quite fun. And this is one of those times where I'm quite actually excited to read this. Of course, as tradition goes, we have our common lighter, and today's premium edition candle is quite a big one. We will open that up and see to the side. Oops, that was quite loud. So here we have the Spices in Love collection, and we will set that to the side after we light it. There's one, and there's two. Spices and Love collection. I can already smell it, and it smells very good. We will set that to the side. I think that is a perfect place to put it. Without further ado, let us begin reading If We Were Villains. For the many weird and wonderful thespians whom I have had the good fortune to call my friends, I promise this is not about you. Act 1. The prologue. I sit with my wrists cuffed to the table, and I think, but that I am forbid to tell the secrets of my prison house. I could a tale unfold whose lightest word would harrow up thy soul. The guard stands by the door watching me, like he's waiting for something to happen. Enter Joseph Colborne. He is a graying man, almost 50. It's a surprise every few weeks to see how much he's aged, and he's aged a little more every few weeks for 10 years. He sits across from me, folds his hands, and says, "Oliver, Joe, heard the parole hearing went your way. Congratulations. I'd thank you if I thought you meant it. You know, I don't think you belong in here. doesn't mean you think I'm innocent. No. He sighs. Checks his watch, the same one he's worn since we met, as if I'm boring him. So why are you here, I ask. Same fortnightly reason. His eyebrows make a flat black line. You would say fucking a fortnight. You can take the boy out of the theater or something like that. He shakes his head, simultaneously amused and annoyed. Well, I say. Well, what? The gallows does well, but how does it well? It does well to those that do ill, I reply, determined to deserve his annoyance. Why are you here? You should know by now I'm not going to tell you anything. Actually, he says, this time I think I might be able to change your mind. I sit up straighter in my chair. How? I'm leaving the force. Sold out. Took a job in private security. Got my kids' education to think about. For a moment, I simply stare at him. Cold-born. I always imagined we'd have to be put down like a savage old dog before he'd leave the chief's office. How's that supposed to persuade me? I ask. Anything you say will be strictly off the record. Then why bother? He sighs again, and all the lines on his face deepen. Oliver, I don't care about doling out punishment. Not anymore. Someone served the time, and we rarely get that much satisfaction in our line of work. But I don't want to hang up my hat and waste the next 10 years wondering what really happened 10 years ago. I say nothing at first. I like the idea, but don't trust it. I glance around at the grim cinder blocks, the tiny black video cameras that peer down from every corner, the guard with his jutting underbite. I close my eyes. Inhale deeply and imagine the freshness of Illinois springtime. What it will be like to step outside after gasping on stale prison air for a third of my life. When I exhale, I open my eyes and Colborne is watching me closely. I don't know, I say. I'm getting out of here one way or the other. I don't want to risk coming back. Seems safer to let sleeping dogs lie. His fingers drum restlessly on the table. Tell me something, he says. Do you ever lie in your cell, staring up at the ceiling, wondering how you wound up in here, and you can't sleep because you can't stop thinking about that day? Every night, I say, without sarcasm. But here's the difference, Joe. For you, it was just one day, then business as usual. For us, it was one day, and every single day that came after. I lean forward on my elbows, so my face is only a few inches from his, so he hears every word when I lower my voice. It must eat you alive, not knowing who, not knowing how, not knowing why, but you didn't know him. He wears a strange quasi expression now, as if I've become unspeakably ugly and awful to look at. You've kept your secrets all this time, he says. feels heavy in my chest. Secrets carry weight like lead. I lean back. The guard watches impassively, as if we're two strangers talking in another language, our conversation distant and insignificant. I think of the others. Once upon a time, us. We did wicked things, but they were necessary too, or so it seemed. Looking back years later, I'm not so sure they were. And now, wonder, could I explain it all to Colburn? The little twists and turns and final exodus. I study his blank open face, the grey eyes winged now by crow's feet, but clear and bright as they have always been. All right, I say, I'll tell you a story, but you have to understand a few things. Colborne is motionless. I'm listening. First, I'll start talking after I get out of here, not before. Second, this can't come back to me or anyone else. No double jeopardy. And last, it is not an apology. I wait for some response from him, a nod, a word, but he only blinks at me, silent and stoic as a sphinx. Well, Joe, I say, can you live with that? He gives me a cold sliver of a smile. Yes, I think I can. Scene 1. The time, September 1997, my fourth and final year at Delaware Classical Conservatory. The place, Broadwater, Illinois, a small town of almost no consequence. It had been a warm autumn so far. Enter the players. There were 7 of us then. 7 bright young things with wide, precious futures ahead of us. Though we saw no farther than the books in front of our faces, we were always surrounded by books and words and poetry. All the fierce fashions of the world bound in leather and vellum. I blame this in part for what happened. The castle library was an airy, octagonal room, walled with bookshelves, crowded with sumptuous old furniture, and kept drowsily warm by a monumental fireplace that burned almost constantly, regardless of the temperature outside. The clock on the mantel struck 12, and we stirred one by one, like 7 statues coming to life. "'Tis now dead midnight," Richard said. He sat in the largest armchair like it was a throne, long legs outstretched, feet propped on the grate. 3 years of playing kings and conquerors had taught him to sit that way in every chair, on stage or off. And by 8 o'clock tomorrow we must be made immortal. He closed his book with a snap. Meredith curled like a cat on one end of the sofa, while I sprawled like a dog on the other, toyed with one strand of her long auburn hair as she asked, "Where are you going?" Richard, weary with toil, I haste me to my bed. Philippa, spare us. Richard, early mornings and all that. Alexander, he says as if he's concerned. Wren, sitting cross-legged on a cushion by the hearth and oblivious to the others' bickering, said, "Have you all picked your pieces?" I can't decide. Me, what about Isabella? Your Isabella's excellent. Meredith, measures comedy, you fool. We're auditioning for Caesar. I don't know why we bother auditioning at all. Alexander slumped over the table, wallowing in the darkness at the back of the room, reached for a bottle of scotch at his elbow. He refilled his glass, took one huge gulp, and grimaced at the rest of us. I could cast the whole bastarding thing right now. How? I asked. I never know where I'll end up. That's because they always cast you last, Richard said. As whatever happens to be left over. Tisk, tisk. Meredith said. Are we Richard tonight, or are we Dick? Ignore him, Oliver, James said. He sat by himself in the farthest corner, loath to look up from his notebook. He had always been the most serious student in our year, which probably explained why he was also the best actor, and certainly why no one resented him for it. There, Alexander had unfolded a wad of $10 bills from his pockets and was counting them out on the table. That's $50. For what? Meredith said. You want a lap dance? Why? Are you practicing for our graduation? Bite me. Ask nicely. $50 for what? I said, keen to interrupt. Meredith and Alexander had by far the foulest mouths among the 7 of us, and took a perverse kind of pride in outcussing each other. If we let them, they'd go at it all night. Alexander tapped the stack of tens with one long finger. I bet $50 I can call the cast list right now and not be wrong. 5 of us exchanged curious glances. Wren was still frowning into the fireplace. All right, let's hear it, Philippa said with a wan little sigh, as though her curiosity had gotten the better of her. Alexander pushed his unruly black curls back from his face and said, well, obviously Richard will be Caesar, because we all secretly want to kill him, James asked. Richard arched one dark eyebrow. Et tu, brute. Sit semper tyrannus, James said, and drew the tip of his pen across his throat like a dagger, thus always to tyrants. Alexander gestured from one of them to the other. Exactly, he said. James will be Brutus, because he's always the good guy. And I'll be Cassius, because I'm always the bad guy. Richard and Wren can't be married because that would be gross, so she'll be Porta, Meredith will be Calpurnia, and Pip. You'll end up in drag again. Philippa, more difficult to cast than Meredith, the femme fatale, or Wren, the ingenue, was obliged to cross-dress whenever we ran out of good female parts. A common occurrence in the Shakespearean theatre. Kill me, she said. Wait, I said, effectively proving Richard's hypothesis that I was a permanent leftover in the casting process. Where does that leave me? Alexander studied me with narrowed eyes, running his tongue across his teeth. Probably as Octavius, he decided. They won't make you Antony. No offense, but you're just not conspicuous enough. It'll be that insufferable third year... What's his name? Philippa. Richard II. Richard. Hilarious. No. Colin Highland. Spectacular. I looked down at the next text of Pericles. I was scanning for what felt like the 100th time. Only half as talented as any of the rest of them, I seemed doomed to always play supporting roles in someone else's story. Far too many times I had asked myself whether art was imitating life, or if it was the other way around. Alexander, $50 on that exact casting. Any takers? Meredith, no. Alexander, why not? Philippa, because that's precisely what'll happen. Richard chuckled and climbed out of his chair. One can only hope. He started toward the door and leaned over to pinch James's cheek on his way out. Good night, sweet prince. James Richard's hand away with his notebook, then made a show of disappearing behind it again. Meredith echoed Richard's laugh and said, "Thou art as hot a Jack in thy mood as any in Italy. A plague, O both your houses," James muttered. Meredith stretched with a small, suggestive groan and pushed herself off the couch. "Coming to bed?" Richard asked. Yes, Alexander's made all this work seem rather pointless. She left her books scattered on the low table in front of the fire, her empty wine glass with them. A crescent of lipstick clinging to the rim. "Good night," she said to the room at large. "Godspeed." They disappeared down the hall together. I rubbed my eyes, which were beginning to burn from the effort of reading for hours on end. Wren tossed her book backward over her head, and I started as it landed beside me on the couch. "To hell with it, Alexander. That's the spirit, Wren. I'll just do Isabella. Philippa, just go to bed." Wren stood slowly, blinking the vestigial light of the fire out of her eyes. "I'll probably lie awake all night reciting lines," she said. "Want to come out for a smoke?" Alexander had finished his whiskey again and was rolling a spliff on the table. "Might help you relax." "No, thank you," she said, drifting out in the hall. "Good night." "Suit yourself." Alexander pushed his chair back, spliff poking out of one corner of his mouth. "Oliver, if I help you smoke that, I'll wake up with no voice tomorrow." "Pip." She nudged her glass up into her hair and coughed softly, testing her throat. "God, you're terrible influence," she said. "Fine." He nodded, already halfway out of the room, hands buried deep in his pockets. I watched them go, a little jealously, then slumped down against the arm of the couch. I struggled to focus on my text, which was so aggressively annotated that it was barely legible anymore. Pericles, Antioch, farewell, for wisdom sees those men. Blush not in actions blacker than night. Will skew no cause to keep them from the light. One sin, I know, another doth provoke. Murders as near to lust as flame to smoke. I murmured the last two lines under my breath. I knew them by heart, had known them for months, but the fear that I would forget a word or phrase halfway through my audition gnawed at me. I glanced across the room at James and said, "Do you ever wonder if Shakespeare knew this speeches half as well as we do?" He withdrew from whatever verse he was reading, looked up and said, "Constantly." I cracked a smile, vindicated just enough. Well, I give up. I'm not actually getting anything done. He checked his watch. No, I don't think I am either. I heaved myself off the sofa and followed James up the spiral stairs to the bedroom we shared, which was directly over the library, the highest of 3 rooms in a little stone column commonly referred to as the tower. It had once been used only as an attic, but the cobwebs and clutter had been cleared away to make room for more students in the late 70s. 20 years later it housed James and me, 2 beds with blue delicates bedspreads, 2 monstrous old wardrobes, and a pair of mismatched bookshelves too ugly for the library. "Do you think it'll fall out how Alexander says?" I asked. James pulled his shirt off, moosing his hair in the process. "If you ask me, it's too predictable. When have they ever surprised us?" "Frederick surprises me all the time," he said. "But Gwendolen will have the final say. She always does. If it were up to her, Richard would play all of the men and half of the women, which would leave Meredith playing the other half." He pressed the heels of his palm against his eyes. "Ugh, when do you read tomorrow?" "Right after Richard. Philippa's after me. And I'm after her. God, I feel bad for her." "Yeah," I said. "It's a wonder she hasn't dropped out." James frowned thoughtfully as he wriggled out of his jeans. Well, she's a bit more resilient than the rest of us. Maybe that's why 𝓦𝓮𝓻𝓮 torments her. Just because she can take it, I said, discarding my own clothes in a pile on the floor. That's cruel. He shrugged. That's 𝓦𝓮𝓻𝓮. If I had my way, I'd turn it all upside down, I said. Make Alexander Caesar and have Richard play Cassius instead. He folded his comforter back and asked, Am I still Brutus? No, I tossed a sock at him. You're Antony. For once, I get to be the lead. Your time will come to be the tragic hero. Just wait for spring. I glanced up from the drawer I was pawing through. Has Frederick been telling you secrets again? He lay down and folded his hands behind his head. He may have mentioned Troilus and Cressida. He has this fantastic idea to do it as a battle of the sexes. All the Trojans men, all the Greeks women. That's insane. Why, that play is as much about sex as it was about war, he said. 𝓦𝓮𝓻𝓮 will want Richard to be Hector, of course, but that makes you Troilus. Why on earth wouldn't you be Troilus? He arched his back. I may have mentioned that I'd like to have a little more variety on my resume. I stared at him, unsure if I should be insulted. Don't look at me like that, he said, a low note of reproach in his voice. He agreed we all need a break from our boxes. I'm tired of playing fools in love with like trolleys, and I'm sure you're tired of always playing the sidekick. I flopped on my back. Yeah, you're probably right. For a moment I let my thoughts wander, and then I breathed out a laugh. Something funny? James asked as he reached over to turn out the light. You'll have to be Cressida, I told him. You're the only one of us pretty enough. We lay there laughing in the dark until we dropped off to sleep and slept deeply with no way of knowing that the curtain was about to rise on a drama of our own invention. Delicate Classical Conservatory occupied 20 or so acres of land on the eastern edge of Broadwater, and the borders of the two so often overlapped that it was difficult to tell where campus ended and town begun. The first years were housed in a cluster of brick building in town, while the second and third years were crowded together at the hall, and the handful of fourth years were tucked away in odd isolated corners of campus or left to fend for themselves. We, the fourth-year theatre students, lived on the far side of the lake in what was whimsically called the castle. Not really a castle, but a small-town stone building that happened to have one turret, originally the groundkeeper's quarters. Delica Hall, a sprawling red brick mansion, looked down a steep hill on the dark flat water of the lake. Dormitories and the ballroom on the fourth and fifth floors, classrooms and offices on the second and third, while the ground floor was divided into refectory, music hall, library, and a conservatory. A chapel jutted off the west end of the building, and sometimes in the 1960s, the Archibald Delacour Fine Arts Building, generally referred to as the FAB for more than one reason, was erected on the east side of the hall. A small courtyard and honeycomb of corbelled walkways wedged between them. The FAB was home to the Archibald Delacour Theatre, and the rehearsal hall and ergo was where we spent most of our time. At 8 in the morning on the first day of classes, it was exceptionally quiet. Richard and I walked from the castle together, though I wasn't due to audition for another half hour. How do you feel? He asked as we climbed the steep hill to the lawn. Nervous, like I always am. The number of auditions under my belt didn't matter. The anxiety never really left me. No need to be, he said. You're never as dreadful as you think you are. Just don't shift your weight too much. You're most interesting when you stand still. I frowned at him. How do you mean? I mean, when you forget you're on stage and forget to be nervous, you really listen to other actors, really hear the words like it's the first time you've heard them. It's wonderful to work with and marvelous to watch. He shook his head at the look of consternation on my face. I shouldn't have told you. Don't get self-conscious unconscious. He clapped one huge hand on my shoulder, and I was so distracted I pitched forward, my fingertips brushing the dewy grass. Richard's booming laugh echoed in the morning air, and he grabbed my arm to help me find my balance. "See," he said, "keep your feet planted, and you'll be fine." "You suck," I said, but with a grudging smile. Richard had that effect on people. As soon as we reached FAB, he gave me another cheery smack on the back and disappeared into the rehearsal hall. I paced back and forth along the crossover, puzzling over what he had said and repeating pericles to myself like I was saying a string of Hail Marys. Our first semester auditions determined which parts we would play in our fall production. That year, Julius Caesar, tragedies and histories were reserved for the fourth years, while the third years were relegated to romance and comedy, and all the bit parts were played by their second years. First years were left to work backstage, slog through general education, and wonder what the hell they'd gotten themselves into. Each year, students whose performance was deemed unsatisfactory were cut from the program, often as many as half, to survive until fourth year was proof of either talent or dumb luck. In any case, the latter. Class photos from the past 50 years hung in two neat rows along the wall in the crossover. Ours was the last and certainly the sexiest. A publicity photo from the previous year's production of A Midsummer's Night's Dream. We looked younger. It was Frederick's idea to do Midsummer's as a pajama party. James and I, Lysander and Demetrius respectively, wore striped boxes and white undershirts and stood glaring at each other with Hermia in a short pink nightgown. Trapped between us, Philippa stood on my left in Helena's longer blue nightdress, clutching the pillow she and Ren had walloped each other with in Act 3. In the middle of the photo, Alexander and Meredith were wrapped around each other like a pair of snakes. He, a sinister and seductive Oberon in slinky silk bathrobe, she of voluptuous titania in a revealing black lace. But Richard was the most arresting, standing among the other rude mechanicals in clownish flannel pajamas, enormous donkey ears protruding from his thick black hair. His neck bottom was aggressive, unpredictable, and totally deranged. He terrorized the fairies, tormenting the other players, scared the hell out of the audience, and as always, stole the show. The seven of us had survived 3 yearly purges because we were each somehow indispensable to the playing company. In the course of 4 years, we were transformed from a rabble of bit players to a small, meticulously trained dramatic troupe. Some of our theatrical assets were obvious. Richard was pure power, 6'3", and carved from concrete with sharp black eyes and a thrilling bass voice that flattened every other sound in a room. He played warlords and despots and anyone else the audience needed to be impressed by or afraid of. Meredith was uniquely designed for seduction, a walking daydream of supple curves and skin like satin, but there was something merciless about her sex appeal. You watched her when she moved, whatever else was happening, and whether you wanted to or not. She and Richard had been together in every typical sense of the word since the spring semester of our second year. Ren, Richard's cousin, though you never would have guessed it by looking at them, was the Inguini, the girl next door, a wayfish thing with corn silk hair and round china doll eyes. Alexander was our resident villain, thin and wiry, with long dark curls and sharp canine teeth that made him look like a vampire when he smiled. Philippa and I are more difficult to categorize. She was tall, olive-skinned, vaguely boyish. There was something cool and camelinic about her that made her equally convincing as Horatio or Emilia. I, on the other hand, was average in every imaginable way, not especially handsome, not especially talented, not especially good at anything, but just good enough at everything that I could pick up, whatever slack the others left. I was convinced I had survived the third-year purge because James would have been moody and sullen without me. Fate had dealt us a good hand in our first year, when he and I found ourselves squashed together in a tiny room on the top floor of the dormitories. When I'd first opened our door, he looked up from the bag he was unpacking, held out his hand and said, "Here comes Sir Oliver, you are well met, I hope." He was was the sort of actor everyone fell in love with as soon as he stepped on stage, and I was no exception. Even in our early days at Delegate, I was protective and even possessive of him when other friends came too close and threatened to usurp my place at best. An event as rare as a meteor shower, some people saw me as Gwendolen always cast me, simply the loyal sidekick. James was so quintessentially a hero that this didn't bother me. He was the handsomest of us. Meredith once compared him to a Disney prince. But more charming than that was his childlike depth of feeling, on stage and off. For 3 years I enjoyed the overflow of his popularity and admired him intensely, without jealousy, even though he was Frederick's obvious favorite in much the same way that Richard was Gwendolen's. Of course, James did not have Richard's ego or temper and was liked by everyone, while Richard was hated and loved with equal ferocity. It was customary for us to watch whichever audition followed our own. Performing unobserved was compensation for performing first, and I paced restlessly along the crossover, wishing that James could have been my audience, even when he didn't mean to be. Richard was an intimidating onlooker. I could hear his voice from the rehearsal hall ringing off the walls. Richard. Therefore, take heed how you impawn our person, how you awake our sleeping sword of war. We charge you in the name of God, take heed, for never two such kingdoms did contend, without much fall of blood, whose guiltless drops are every one a woe, a sore complaint against him whose wrongs give edge unto the swords that makes such waste in brave mortality. I'd seen him do the same speech twice before, but that made it no less impressive. At precisely 8:30, the door to the rehearsal hall creaked open. Frederick's familiar face, wizened and droll, appeared in the gap. "Oliver, we're ready for you now." "Great." My pulse quickened, a flutter like little bird wings trapped between my lungs. I felt small walking into the rehearsal hall, as I always did. It was a cavernous room with a high vaulted ceiling and long windows that gazed out on the grounds. Blue velvet curtains hung on either side of them, hems gathered in dusty piles on the hardwood floor. My voice echoed as I said, "Good morning, Gwendolen." The red-headed, stick-figure woman behind the casting table glanced up at me, her presence in the room disproportionately enormous. Bold pink lipstick and a paisley headscarf made her look like some sort of gypsy. She wiggled her fingers in greeting, and the bangles on her wrist rattled. Richard sat in the chair to the left of the table, arms folded, watching me with a comfortable smile. I was not leading man material and therefore didn't qualify as competition. I flashed him a grin, then tried to ignore him. "Oliver," Gwendolen said, "lovely to see you. Have you lost weight?" "Gained it, actually," I said, my face going warm. When I left for summer break, she advised me to bulk up. I spent hours at the gym every day of June, July, and August hoping to impress her. She said, gaze descending slowly from the top of my head to my feet with the cold scrutiny of a slave trader at auction. "Well, shall we get started?" "Sure." Remembering Richard's advice, I straightened my feet on the floor and resolved not to move without reason. Frederick eased back into his seat beside Gwendolen, removed his glasses, and wiped the lenses on the hem of his shirt. "What do you have for us today?" he asked. "Pericles," I said. He had suggested it the previous term. He gave me a small conspirational nod. "Perfect. Whenever you are ready." And I believe that shall conclude us of our reading session. This was very entertaining to read. I actually really enjoyed it. I love the acting part of it. I myself love acting, so it comes naturally for me to enjoy those parts of the book. This will definitely come back. I hope this video was enjoyable to watch and to listen are sleeping very well. Or if you woke up and were deciding to, out of curiosity, know what is at the end, I thank you for coming back to this video and watching it. I love you guys, and I love the, let's say, routine of coming back to my videos every time, even when you don't have to. I honestly am very beginner at this, and I do not have quite a good setup. I am just doing this because I enjoy reading, and I'm very glad that you guys are enjoying it with me. And that being said, I hope you guys sleep well, and I hope that whatever you guys want, you can link in the comments, and I will try to respond to the best of my ability. Thank you for your support.